Welcome, Dr. Vandenbourne. We are so thrilled to have you here today to talk to us about imaging and how it started and where it's gone to. And we really thank you for your time. I know summer days are and holidays are with family really should be private, but we are really grateful for your time. So just as a start, can you tell me a little bit about how did you get to Florida and how did this idea of imaging muscle come to be?
Well, first of all, Pat, thank you for being here as well. I know you're on a small vacation as well, so I'm really happy that we were able to connect here. So this goes back a long time. This actually goes back to our time when we were at the University of Pennsylvania, when we worked together with Lee Sweeney, Rick Finkel, and we had been doing measurements in animal models of muscular dystrophy. Obviously, as you know, Lee was already working in the area of muscular dystrophy, and he convinced us to really try to use MR imaging to look at the muscle lesions in the MDX mouse. Having Rick there allowed us to get started and start looking at imaging boys with Duchenne. Ultimately, both my husband, Dr. Glenn Walter, and myself, we were both recruited here to the University of Florida. And this has been a wonderful opportunity. It serves as the biological arm of the National High Magnetic Field Lab. So there are a lot of experts in the field of MR imaging at the university. And so over the last couple of years, we have all been working together to move MR imaging from the early work in animal models to multi-center studies to look at quantifying disease progression in a large cohort of boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
So we hear in this community the concept of fat fraction. But tell us how you're imaging, what are you seeing, and what does fat fraction mean?
Okay. So as you know, when the muscle is healthy, the muscle fibers are nicely organized. And so when you look at an image, the signal looks very homogeneous. But as the disease progresses, fat infiltrates the muscle, and is that fat that you can actually quantify. So what you measure is the relationship or the ratio of fat to muscle.
Okay, thank you. And then the natural history study that you've done in looking at fat fraction, you can predict the state of progression or the loss of function in the people you're imaging?
Yeah, absolutely. So fat fraction, or the amount of fat that infiltrates the muscle, really tracks the disease progression very carefully. So you can get a very exact picture of the disease state by measuring fat fraction.
And so when this started from University of Pennsylvania and then moved to the University of Florida, this is an NIH funded study, is that correct?
Yes, ImagingNMD is an NIH funded study. We were funded in 2010, and as part of that study, we had 3 different sites. That was Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, Oregon Health Science University in Portland, and the University of Florida.
And how many sites do you have now?
So right now we have trained probably more than 30 sites across the United States and Europe to run these different MR protocols that were developed as part of the NIH grant to support clinical trials.
So Krista, as we think about Duchenne, you've done a natural history study, or you continue to do the natural history study on Duchenne. You're looking at other studies as well. Can you describe some of those studies and how, because our community is big, Becker females, people who've been in different studies. Can you talk to us about how that's branched out into looking at fat fraction under different circumstances?
Yeah. So originally, as you know, this project really started looking at characterizing disease progression in boys with Duchenne. At this point, we have studied about 180 boys with Duchenne, with some of them being measured over the course of more than 10 years. So we really have a very comprehensive data set that has been acquired thanks to the help of so many different families. But about 3 years ago, we decided that it was time to expand. We had learned so much in Duchenne that it could benefit other diseases as well. And so at this point, we study young men and older men as well with Becker's muscular dystrophy to really understand that disease and to also help support clinical trials in Becker's. We are also studying individuals with limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, and then finally female carriers. The work in female carriers is very important, and it's being spearheaded with one of our faculty, Alison Bernard, that's located at the University of Florida. And she is essentially using the same measurements that we have developed over the last 15 years in boys with Duchenne to help us understand the disease progression in women and young females as well that are carriers.
So Krista, sorry. Are you, as you look at female carriers, are you also looking at their cardiac status? Because we hear a lot about heart disease in female carriers, and are you extending that the cardiac analysis to other diseases?
Yeah, so we now have a number of faculty at the University of Florida that have developed, spent a lot of time developing cardiac measures as well. And so we are doing cardiac measures in boys with Duchenne as well as female carriers to understand the impact of the disease.
And then talk to me a little bit. I know we have a growing number of young boys and men who've participated in gene therapy studies. Are you looking at these children as well and these young men to figure out, what the impact of a microdystrophin is on disease progression?
Yes, absolutely. You're right. We think it's very important that we understand the disease trajectory in the boys that have been treated with gene therapy. So we have been following now a number of boys that come to the University of Florida once a year, and we look at both cardiac and skeletal muscle.
And how did all this funding begin? And it's still, all of these studies are funded by NIH?
It's really a mix. We're very fortunate that in the beginning we wrote the NIH grant, and we were very, very close in funding, but not quite there. And so PPMD was very generous, and they gave us a $250,000 grant to help us bridge. And that really was the start of it. Today, we are funded by NIH that supports a number of studies. We are funded by PPMD, the Department of Defense, as well as industry sponsors.
So, Krista, are you also doing clinical trials, or are you the imaging center for the clinical trials, and people are coming to you within those clinical trials?
So at the University of Florida, we run our NIH grants as well as the other development projects. In addition to that, we support clinical trials. So we develop the MR protocols, we train and certify imaging sites across the US and Europe to support the clinical trials.
And as parents and families in a community, we're always very interested in the results. So if I'm one of the parents of children in one of your studies, do you give me the results, or a carrier? Do you talk to me about what you've learned about me or my child?
Yes, for all of the studies that we direct, we typically review the data with the parents or with the individual. A lot of times we set up a Zoom call just the way that we are doing here, Pat, and we review the images and explain what we see and allow the parents to ask questions. We feel it's really important to share the data with the families. It is thanks to all of the families that we have collected all of the information that we have. So we feel it's right to share it back.
Oh, I totally agree. I think this is one thing about participation in natural history studies or in clinical trials. The real question is, how did I do? How did my son do? How does all this, what does this mean in terms of his progression in the disease? So I really applaud you for that. So Krista, what do you hope for? What are you looking for in the future? If you could close your eyes and there weren't any barriers, where are we going, and what do you expect to see?
So what we've been working very hard to, I think, probably more than 2 decades worth at this point, is really for us to help develop MR biomarkers to be used as surrogate endpoints in clinical trials so that we can more quickly determine whether a drug is working or not. And obviously, our ultimate goal is to find a cure for the families with Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
Krista, that's wonderful. I mean, that's really music to our ears. And so if we are thinking of in a world to come, that the biomarker would be fat fraction, you think that we could eliminate placebos in clinical trials?
That's a really good question. Obviously, what's really important is all of the natural history studies that are ongoing, because they can be shared as external controls. We've already done that successfully. In fact, the summit used ImagingNMD natural history data and did not have to use a placebo. So my hope is that we can ultimately do that.
Are any other companies doing that at this moment, at least with you?
We do have other companies that allow us to enhance their placebo, so that you could essentially do smaller placebos group and use natural history data to supplement it. So even if we may not completely replace the placebos, we can at least enhance it.
Yeah. That means shorter time in placebo and fewer patients exposed to placebo. Well,
Exactly.
I can't thank you enough for what you do. We're very excited, and certainly for female carriers. I think this is one of the areas where moms often don't want to take care of themselves or put themselves last on the list. So I think the study looking at women in who carry this gene, who have this, obviously the same mutation as their son, and insisting on and helping them understand what health risks they have is really brilliant. So how many patients are allowed in that study, or how many females?
I think right now we're up to 12 females. We are looking for additional funding because we are already fully enrolled in that study. And I know Alison Bernard is really eager to expand the study. So we are hoping to get additional funding and expand the study.
Yeah, well, we certainly love and welcome the opportunity, Krista. I think we've seen so many women with weakness as well as cardiac issues that I think it's going to be really important. And in fact, at University of Pennsylvania, they've started a female carrier clinic, the first identified female carrier clinic that we've ever seen. So we would love to have you work with them and work with us on that. But I can't thank you enough for today. Thank you so very much for taking time to speak with us, and we wish you all the best. And of course, wish for the day that fat fraction is the way to measure what's happening in muscle.
Well, thank you, Pat, for all of your support and believing in this project, starting that long ago. And we are just grateful to all of the families and all of the participants that have allowed us to be a part of this trajectory. And same as you, we are hoping for a cure in the very near future.
We are all in this together. Thank you so much, Krista.
You're welcome. Bye-bye, Pat.